Pretty cool, man. So yeah, I mean, from what I understand, there was like a lot of internal resistance because you had to switch to a completely different model. So I was wondering, how did that resistance manifest in your actions? Like, okay, can you give me like, okay, can you paint like a picture about how did what was happening? Like, okay, did you find you were procrastinating when you were building like the system? Did you take a lot of time to get back to people? I mean, anything?
So fortunately, I have a habit of executing really, really fast and then trying to figure things out. So I think part of there were a couple potential issues. One is the initial version of the VSL I did was extremely vague. Like it had some concrete case studies, but my system that I was saying, like, here's the process I'm going to use to get your results. It basically had no concrete detail because I hadn't decided at that point, like, here are the specific, ultra specific things I'm going to do. It was more on a general strategic level. And I was able to, I guess, display my experience sufficiently, but having written dozens of VSLs, I know that there was a lot of room for improvement there. And same thing with like some of the email copy, cold email copy, and even getting on the initial calls and not being entirely sure what my offer was going to be at the end of the call. Like I decided I'm doing this. I built the whole thing. I launched it. I started getting on calls and I figured out what my offer was going to be from having those conversations. So I didn't have it all figured out beforehand. I had enough of it figured out beforehand to move and to make things happen. And I think this is also one of the reasons that I tend to succeed with my marketing efforts when maybe a lot of freelancers don't, is because I don't try to figure it all out beforehand. Like, how can I execute this yesterday and seeing that it's today? Well, how can I then execute it today instead? So it's like, that's sort of my benchmark for success in a way, speed of execution. So I did that. I got on a bunch of calls. That gave me market feedback, and I figured out, one, I needed to target a slightly more advanced audience in terms of their business journey. So this actually is another answer to your question. I made the assumption from having worked with Learn and Neil and a bunch of others that businesses at that stage would already have a copywriter in-house. Learn has a bunch of copywriters in-house. Neil has, well, it varies. Copywriters in-house most of the time. And I figured that, yeah, if I was targeting those businesses, maybe I have a good offer, but I'm just stepping on the toes of like the people they're already paying to do the thing I'm offering to do. So it's like for them to say, get on a call with someone who's like, okay, am I going to make things 10% better, 20%? Like I didn't think it was a great offer. So I targeted slightly smaller businesses. That worked incredibly well, but it had a too high a percentage of people who weren't at a stage where they could pay me appropriately for what I wanted to do or for what I could do for them. Like even on it didn't matter if it was money down or result based. They didn't have the size of audience. They didn't have even if they had a bunch of cash, I probably couldn't have closed a bunch of those deals because I couldn't have gotten the result. They were too small. I mean, I couldn't have justified the expense for what I wanted to do for them. Depending on the service, it's email marketing to a tiny list with an unvalidated offer. Not like a funnel that's going to go to cold traffic. Different conversation. But anyway, that was another thing that I went through, and I was like, okay, well, I relaunched the campaign with a couple minor tweaks to an audience that has a higher employee count, which is the best proxy for income when you don't have that directly. Oh, I mean, unless maybe you have ad spend numbers, which great if you're using SpyFu or something, you can get that. Then what was your actual question? Mindset and roadblocks and something.
I asked like the last question was, okay, if you how did the resistance that you faced, how did it manifest
Yeah.
itself in the action? But yeah, maybe continue, like that's like a part of my next question. So yeah, I mean, if you want to keep going about like you realizing that you should kind of tweak your targeting, and you found out that it's not like efficient for you to go after companies that already have copywriters, and it's not like
Yeah.
efficient for you to go after like okay smaller businesses. Like okay, if you can continue this trail of thought, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the big takeaway there is that you don't automate and scale something you haven't validated. So, one thing I also did too early was I started sending too many emails too fast. I was starting to scale sending before I had validated the audience offer pairing. I was getting lots of calls, plenty of them were qualified, but not the percentage that I wanted in terms of actually scaling things. It wouldn't have been efficient ultimately. So that's why now I tend to recommend 3,000 contacts is a great amount to test. If you're not getting traction, you might scale up sending to test more ideas. But initially, like 3,000 contacts over the first month is a good starting point, and then you modulate based on what you're seeing. And for anyone who hasn't gone to any type of cold traffic before, I mean, if you have something that's working to ads, you can probably port that over to cold email and be reasonably confident about a lot of things. But you still have to go through, like, you have to go through the process. You have to get on the calls and speak to people in your target market to ultimately know if all of it works. Like, yes, it can end up being kind of a magic bullet, but it's not that from day one, because you still, like, even if everything's perfect, you still have to go through the steps and actually validate the damn thing. So even if everything works perfectly, you're still getting on those calls and making sure I'm speaking to the right people, I'm making the right offer, timing's right, like all of the other, everything has to be in place. So yeah, I sent too much too soon. That's one of the reasons that my calendar just exploded. Targeted not quite the right audience, but I fixed that relatively quickly. And then yeah, it really the biggest thing though was coming up with the super specific offer. Like this is the hill I'm going to die on, sort of thing. But that was partially in the feedback loop, and so I want to stress the idea that getting it launched and getting market feedback is better than trying to figure it all out. So the first day you send emails, you get calls. That's not the goal. The goal is to actually win the game. And the faster you get into that feedback loop from the market, the faster you're going to win the game.
Good stuff, man. Good stuff. I mean that's the essence of entrepreneurship. Like you first want to make sure that there's like a demand, and then you can worry about like okay, everything else that comes afterward. Like first, okay, do I have like a legit business idea or not? If not, yeah, I mean nothing else matters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So yeah, you talked about like okay, you first on top of everything that you did is that you realized you targeted the wrong audience, and then you fixed it like okay very quickly. So can you expand a little bit on that, because I believe that some people will also have this issue. So I'm reaching out to a bunch of people, but they're horrible prospects. So how can you do, what's the process that you followed?
Sure. So um, there are sort of general categories. So the first one, and the most obvious one, is industry, right? If you're targeting e-learning, don't also target SaaS at the same time that you're targeting e-commerce. Like pick a lane. It can be a wide lane. It can be a superhighway. E-learning is a superhighway. E-commerce is a superhighway. Right? There are more than enough opportunities to last multiple lifetimes on each one of those lanes. You can test them all, but getting one thing to work is hard enough. Get one thing to work and exploit that to its maximum before you go screwing around with something else. The only exception I would make to that rule is if you literally want to test 3 different marketplaces, you have like one cool thing that you do. I have the $3 per day ad strategy, and it can work literally for everyone. And I want to see which one of these big markets responds the best to this type of thing. Then fine, then you choose, okay, SaaS is responding really well, so now I'm going to focus entirely on SaaS. That's fine. If you're doing it strategically, and you know why you're doing it. But okay, you pick your lane, and then you want to find businesses that are in sort of a Goldilocks zone. They're not so big that they're already doing everything that you do, or they think they're doing everything that you do. Right? You don't really want to convince anyone that they need your stuff, right? You want to work with people who are already inclined to buy more of what they're already buying or have bought in the past, or are exploring, at minimum, open to buying. So as a very, very general rule, like massive corporate, depends on your service, obviously. Massive corporations, it's going to be relatively difficult to sell Coca-Cola your VSL service. Other solo entrepreneurs who haven't made a sale yet, that's not going to be possible at all. They don't have the money and they don't understand why they need what you do. So generally you want to be somewhere in the middle. There are exceptions, but again, if you are the exception, you have to know why you're the exception. I have a client who is the exception because what they do, they already have clientele, they have proven it, they're in the recruiting space, they know that recruiters between 1 and 10 employees is their sweet spot, but they still have to be making some revenue. So they have a slightly different qualifying process, and not everyone who comes in the top makes it through to even a call, because they're a one person shop, but they've never sold anything. They're still not qualified, but we have to start by targeting in that band. That being said, I would generally, if you don't have a good reason not to, set the minimum employee count at 3 or 5 or 10. I usually do 5 or 3. For me, doesn't mean it's right for anyone else. I'm doing 3 right now. Because if you think of, say, the average US wage around $50,000, 3 employees means they're spending 150 grand on employees, meaning they're making probably at least $500,000. So I'm okay with having a conversation with someone in that range. But you have to judge for yourself. It's like, what's the minimum size of business I want to work with? How much would that business of that size be spending on their staff? And then you can essentially say, okay, that's 3 employees, 5, 7. We tend to gravitate towards round numbers like 5 or 10, but I'd say don't be lazy about it. Like, actually do some quick back of the napkin math, because like if all of your competition are automatically putting in 10 employees, but you actually calculate it and you say, okay, 6 or 7 is actually where the math says my cutoff should be, well, then I'm going to put 6, and maybe I have like 3% more unqualified calls. Freaking fine. I'm also getting that whole band from 6 to 10 that my competitors aren't targeting. So this is not the thing that's going to make or break your career, but why not spend 10 minutes and do it? So it's stuff like this. I also don't remember what the question was, but I had fun talking about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was like about targeting, because a lot of people are going to have issues with targeting the right people for their services. And I mean, I love like what you explained, because it was like a very easy step-by-step process that you can follow. Of course, there's going to be like some margin for errors. It's like trial and error, but yeah, I mean, you can go get started today. And yeah, I mean, especially with Apollo, you can find some people just hearing like what you suggested. So that was cool. One question that I have, like, I'm not sure if someone is, for the people who are gonna get this offer, will you also help them like refine their targeting? Maybe you shared this in the doc, but yeah, I don't remember this right now out of the top of my head.
So I don't know if I actually talked about that in the doc because it's not a piece of copy, but if someone, in principle, that would be part of it. If someone says, hey, I'm targeting, this is what I do, and this is who I'm going after, these are my targeting parameters, then I would absolutely give give feedback on that. And I also have some suggested targeting parameters that someone could just plug and play, or like plug in, adapt slightly to their situation, and run with.
All right, perfect, man. That's great. That's great. All right. So yeah, I mean, we basically have like two more questions. So, but I love what you've shared so far. My next question is like, while you were using like your cold email machine, did you experience any shifts in your own mindset or belief around generating leads and getting clients specifically? So you had one idea before you got started, and now that you have experienced the joys of high volume, like okay, maybe you have like a different thought, some different thoughts.
Um, I think the main thing is thinking more like a business owner and more about numbers, because when you're dealing again with super low volume, you might be speaking to one prospect, you might be speaking to a handful, but you're never speaking to 50 or 500 or 50,000. So you're never thinking about what would have to be in place for that to even happen. And even like, I don't want to build a massive agency. I like being a one-man show. I like not having to manage people. I like that, but I absolutely, so with that being the case, I absolutely benefit from thinking about the systems, thinking about what does it look like to sort of agency-ify myself, if I can say that. And when people say like work in their business versus work on their business, that's really, to me, that's what the actual distinction is. It's like, I'm thinking of not can I convert a single conversation, but can I have so many conversations that it never matters if any specific person closes. And even systems like, okay, how do I streamline and automate onboarding? How do I manage client, like with an onboarded client, how do I manage the workflows in a less ad hoc way? So I'm just chatting with like my one client on Facebook Messenger about the webinar that we're writing, versus imagining like, what would this have to look like so I could have 10 of these? I don't have to have all 10 of them. I don't have to have 2 of them, but what would it have to look like, and how will that make my life easier and better and the client's experience better? Because they're getting an update on Monday and Friday, and they're I don't know what else they're, maybe there's reporting that, depending on your service, reporting that you give them, or maybe there's a Trello or Asana setup where they can see, okay, we're done the setup process and now we're into this, and then we're going to like, so they can see all the things that are going on. Because I know, especially for copywriters, it's like we get an assignment, we disappear for a month, and we show up with copy. That's the cliche, right? I don't think either of us necessarily do that. But yeah, that's the cliche. Is like, copywriter goes into his copy hole, and at some point he comes out, and hopefully the copy's good. It's like, well, no kidding, you're not getting a lot of repeat business, because even if your copy's good, it sucks working with you. So yeah, all of the biggest mindset shift is systems, it's numbers, it's thinking like, again, also for freelancers, cost of acquisition. No freelancer thinks, no freelancer knows their cost per acquisition. And they certainly don't think about it. It's like, how much does it cost you to, like, maybe for you, you've done reverse consultations. You actually know sometimes what your lead cost and what your acquisition cost is. You can actually map that. But for people who are doing like whatever, they're going to networking events, they're screwing around on Facebook, posting some wins and stuff like that. They get some clients, but that's, I don't want to say it's not a business. It's just not, it's not a system. Right. Whereas if like, I know my cost per, well, I don't know off the top of my head right now, but I can check my cost per acquisition. I can log in and I can see that it's $50 or $100 or whatever it is right now. And my cost per lead and all of that. And that's cool because it also helps me modulate things up or down. It's like, oh, Do I want more clients? I'm spending $100 right now to acquire a client. Can I buy myself some more clients? Yes, I can. I have $100. Like, oh, my cost per acquisition is $3,000. Okay, what does that mean? What does that mean for my business and my lead gen process and my retention strategy and all of the other things that I'm doing? Like that number is not good or bad, but it's absolutely information that I can use to help me decide what to do next. So I think that's the other thing I love about cold email is you get numbers up and down. There are numbers everywhere. You have your open rates, you have the number of emails you sent, you have your reply rate, you have you actually have a funnel. And you can't hide from the numbers. So that I think is, in terms of mindset, that's probably, or perspective shift, that's got to be the big one.
Yeah, love this, man. And while you were talking about numbers, I actually remembered Brian Spironello, who I think you've done some coaching with him, where he did like a very basic presentation on Genesis about his system for keeping track of his hours. And I was like, okay, dude, that's freaking insane. I mean, he has everything mapped out. It was like, that's crazy. Okay, I'm not talking about like Brian's level of detail, but yeah, I mean, having like a basic understanding, or knowing that, okay, if I do X reps of this activity, I am going to generate one lead. And if I generate 5 leads, I'm going to generate a client. Okay. Yeah. Not many people, especially on Facebook, have this. Like, they're like, oh, I'm going to do some posting and clients are just going to manifest themselves. Yeah. That's not a business.
Exactly. And actually, to that point, piggybacking on that, when you have volume, sales, I mean, we're all different. So it might not be that sales anxiety or like trying to close the deal. Maybe that doesn't completely go away. If that's something, I mean, for me, that I don't love getting on sales calls. It's not my favorite thing, but I'm sufficiently good at them and I don't fear them. And part of the reason for that is, well, I also have like years of experience of knowing that I'm going to get a client. So I'm already not in a position of scarcity, but way better than like abundance mindset is an abundance pipeline. Like when you just have calls on your calendar, you don't have a choice. Like you don't have the luxury of feeling that scarcity because you have that call coming tomorrow and in 2 hours and then the next one and the next one. If anything, and it also forces you to be more picky and actually have boundaries and do all these things, because otherwise you drown. I know from experience, I had all these calls and I just drowned in calls. I was like, okay, I need to qualify harder. I need to do all these other things. But yeah, it makes the sales process really easy because you always have the next at bat.
Yeah, makes little sense, man. I love this. Yeah. All right, that's good. So, all right, let's see where we go. Yeah. So, okay, my last, maybe we're gonna split this into 2 questions, but based on what you see happening on the world right now, what would you say makes cold email machine a must-have, not just a nice to have for people out there?
I think the biggest reason it's a must-have is that you never want to be dependent on any outside force for your gig. So great if you're in Genesis and they're putting up jobs on the job board. Great if you're in, or not. I mean, I'm not in there. Great if you're in some mastermind and they're sharing opportunities, or the Cult of Copy job board and they're sharing opportunities, or you're on Upwork, or what was my list? Referrals, networking events, like all of that's great. And if you're doing that, I'm not saying, hey, stop doing what's working and go just do cold email. No, that's insane. But the reason to do cold email is you can set it up really quickly. It can run in the background, and it can constantly, one, be filling your pipeline now, but also be backfilling that pool, that big, eventually big pool of people who know what you do and are potentially interested in it. So it's like the ideal situation is, yes, you get some clients in 2 weeks, but the real big win would be, okay, in a year, I'm going to have several thousand people who are at least potentially interested in talking about this thing I do, buying this thing I do. And that pool just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you really didn't have to work that hard to make it happen. You had to write a couple emails. You had to dig a couple trenches in the tech world that really aren't that difficult compared to a lot of others. It's the sort of semi-passive expansion of your audience. It's like, if you want to build a social media audience, that's a lot of work. It requires a lot of consistency. In this case, the system is your consistency. That's great for me. I'm terribly inconsistent. I'm terribly chaotic by nature. I have to build systems or I get no consistency. That's one reason that we're having this conversation, because I won't get 7 posts. I won't do it. I'll do 1 or 2. But I know that about myself. So it's the consistency. In my mind, it's the long-term building the pool of prospects. So you're not blindsided. I see this from people who are better copywriters than I am, more experienced than I am, whatever, more big names than I have on their whatever, notches on their belt. And they're like, they post in some private group like, oh, I lost my biggest client. I don't have, like, how am I going to pay rent? And they're discounting their services by 80% or something because they need to make money now. They had no backup plan. They're just like, yes, they had a great client who was paying them insane money, but then they lost it and now they have nothing. Like, you don't want to be, I don't want to be there. I don't want you to be there. I don't want anyone to be there. And it's like, ultimately, there are lots of ways you can do it. You can build a group on Facebook. You can run ads on whatever platform you want. I happen to think cold email has a lot of advantages over that because of the ease, because of the low cost, because of the low time cost, because of the relative ease in scaling, and a lot of things. But yeah, I think it really comes down to, you don't want to be like, you don't want to end up in a situation where you don't know where your next client is coming from. And it's probably, the market never gets less competitive. So ad costs never go down. There are never like fewer freelancers in your space to compete with. The AI tools that you're potentially maybe competing with, or competing with people who are using them, or whatever it is, it's not getting easier in any of those regards. So yeah, I mean, I think that having a client acquisition system is imperative, and I happen to think that cold email is the best starting point to do something like that.
Perfect, man. And yeah, I mean, just to expand a little bit, when you said I'm seeing some big name copywriters, okay, who, yeah, I mean, work for big clients and they somehow lose the client, and now you see them like, okay, on job boards, looking for gigs. I actually saw like a guy that, I'm not gonna name him, but I knew that he was working for Russell Branson, like, okay, for ClickFunnels, and he was like, okay, very comfortable. And then now, I mean, I think it was like during summer, I saw him like doing this very needy thing on job posts, where he was like, "Hey X, I just sent you a DM, just making sure that you saw it." And I'm like, oh man, that probably something happened, because if he was still working with ClickFunnels, yeah, I mean, he wouldn't be in the job boards like, okay, saying, "Hey, just making sure that you check my DM." And yeah, that was a little bit, I kind of felt bad for the guy, because I'm like, he's probably a skilled copywriter, but he doesn't have like a process to make him go, okay,
Yeah.
I lost a client. Okay, the client gave me 2 weeks worth of notice that, okay, we're gonna stop working together. Okay, what I'm gonna do today to actually land the client a week from now, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And then not realize it sort of comes back to the idea of if you haven't tested your offer in front of a bunch of people, you don't actually know. It's like, yes, I work for ClickFunnels, and yes, I can put a post on whatever, my Facebook profile or the Nothing Held Back group or anything like, but you don't know it's going to work because you haven't tested it. If for someone with a lot of experience, yeah, you're probably going to get some work. It might be of questionable quality, I don't know, but you have enough big names, and yes, it's not hard to get something, but you want to be as in control of that process as you can, I would argue. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
All right. I have like a couple more follow-up questions. How are we doing on time? Like, do you have like?
Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So now that you're a little bit warmed up, like, can you give me like a good idea about who the ideal like prospect would be for this type of offer? So everything we've talked so far about, okay, I don't know, maybe knowing who they're gonna target, knowing, okay, having like results, having some before and not some case studies. Like, who would be like the perfect client for cold email machine specifically?
So I think it's got to be someone who's doing something B2B service, no B2C stuff. We'll get that out of the way. Probably self-evident, but we'll get it out of the way. Someone who, so a lot of people that I respect who do cold email will say that you've got to have case studies, you've got to have results, you've got to all of this stuff. And there's a lot of truth to that. But there are a lot of companies who don't want to spend the big bucks on the world's best. They would rather have a junior copywriter than ClickFunnels' copy chief because of their budget situations. So I do not at all think that it's off the table for someone who's just getting started. That being said, someone who's just getting started will probably struggle with the volume of strategic business decisions that you're just not used to making. So someone just getting started is probably better off reaching out one-on-one, doing shitty job board gigs and Upwork gigs just to get, you've got to be moving and you've got to be getting experience. But at the same time, if that person has a couple $100 a month, I would absolutely say start testing your offer in cold email, and you can position yourself against the super experienced people by saying, look, I haven't been doing this for 10 years. I don't have $1 million case study, but what I do have is the training. It's like, I'm available right now. You'll get 100% of my focus because I'm not dealing with 20 other clients, right? You just position yourself against everyone else who's sending the emails. You don't try to outcompete them on your proof. You outcompete them on something else, and you grab a different segment of the market. So as with any marketing strategy, beginners will have a harder time with it because it's because they're a beginner, not because cold email doesn't work as well for them. It will work differently for them because they're in a different spot and they need to have different messaging. And part of their problem is going to be they will be looking at all the messaging of people who have lots of cool case studies and cool names to drop. And they're like, I don't have that, so I can't do cold email. I just gave an example of how you could potentially do cold email, right? You're positioning yourself against the people who are more experienced and therefore more expensive and therefore can't give you the client the attention that the client would probably want. That said, the ideal person probably has a couple years of experience, absolutely has results, preferably has those results with a single type of service or even tactical. The more unique the thing you do is, the better fit you are for any type of marketing, but also cold email, because your competitors are also, especially agencies, are sending lots of cold emails, and they have names to drop, and they have case studies to share. So you can go toe to toe with that, but like you can do all of the things within email marketing, but your cold email might be just about the welcome sequence. Like, I can improve your welcome sequence. Like, I have this secret thing that I do. This is getting into the weeds a bit. But to answer, like, who's the perfect person? The perfect person is someone who has something ultra specific that they do that reliably gets results for clients, reliably, repeatably, and that isn't known by everyone, right? If you have something different that makes you stand out. And then the farther away you get from that, the less and less well suited you are for cold email. But it's not technically for cold email, it's for anything. It's for ads, it's for one-to-one outreach, right? If you've never done anything and don't have any interesting, unique, different process, that's also going to be a handicap if you're doing one-to-one outreach. So it's not really a cold email issue if you think about it in those terms. Still, I'd say 1.5 to 2 years of experience, already working with clients regularly, maybe not as regularly as they'd like, but regularly. Ideally making probably $3 to $5 grand a month, if not more. More is always great. Where a couple $100 a month on, okay, 72-ish for sending domains, plus a couple $100 for the data, the contact lists. Yeah, so probably if you're making at least $3 grand and you can set aside 10% of that, and great, like you're going to get really fast feedback on your ideas. And even if you want to continue doing manual one-to-one outreach, your networking events, whatever, you're going to be armed with more data from your market. You've had more conversations, you've got feedback on your offer, you've done all this stuff. Like, it will make everything else better. So I know that's not exactly the answer. Another thing that's really important is it has to be some sort of, let's call it, demand generation service that you provide. So if it's just like, I'll do your logo, that's not a good offer to go to cold email with. It has to have some sort of bottom line measurable benefit. It doesn't have to be money. It could be time. It could be potentially something else that's measurable, but there has to be a bottom line measurable result. So like just web design, not a great offer to cold email unless you want to send 10 or 20 times the emails, or you want to do a multi-step sort of thing. Like, I don't know, you're just looking for a job, you could do it and be like, hey, can I send my portfolio across? I saw whatever. Like, it's not useless, but that's not what it's for. So an offer, yeah, that generates a bottom line measurable result is absolutely key. And then, yeah, beyond that, it's just to what degree do you stand out from other people? But that's sort of a different conversation.
All right, makes sense. I mean, when you're actually looking for someone who has a proof of concept, so basically there is a demand for both the services and them as a person, and you just want to pour some gasoline to their fire, so to speak. So yeah, yes, that would be like the best type of prospect for you. All right, makes sense. So
it's like, you know what you do, you know it works, you know more or less who you do it for or who you might do it for. Like, it's not a complete mystery. Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for finishing the interview about the cold email machine. I really hope that it was illuminating and instructive, and that it will help you go out and build your own cold outreach system that puts really high quality prospects on your calendar long before you actually need them. That's really the goal. And if you do want some help setting this up, either you want to do it yourself, but you could use some guidance, and all the SOPs and all the templates and guidelines and what have you, or you just want me to build it for you, then we should really talk about that on Facebook. And the best way to do that then is to find the link below this interview and we can have a conversation over there. In any case, I appreciate you listening to the end and I wish you the best with your cold outreach efforts.